Hello, you're listening to Me and Paranormal You with your host, Ryan Singer. Because it's more fun to believe.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to another experience of Me and Paranormal You. This is Ryan Singer. I'm excited because today Matthew Jackson of Paraholics is back, fresh off I guess just under a week ago, we were doing our Poasttown investigation.
Yes, I am still kind of digesting the whole evening.
Yes, as am I. And
Yeah.
I don't know, the breadcrumbs that were dropped, the implications as far as, where should this thing go, are exciting to me. And I want to talk to you about that. I want to talk to you about the cabin sessions that you're doing. I want to, and, possible correlations that are happening there, because there's also something very interesting. I already brought up to you this off mic before we started, but there's something interesting about something else that comes up in your cabin session in that first week that directly correlates to someone and something else. So first, let's kind of just talk about the overall feeling of Poasttown last weekend, before we get into the nitty gritty of it. When you came into Poasttown this past weekend, I think a lot of us try not to have expectations, particularly going into investigations, just to try to not, overly bias ourselves. Although I was loaded up with expectations, obviously, because I came with specific things I wanted to, specific quote unquote work I wanted to get in while we were there. But what were your overall expectations going in?
Pardon me. Really, just to hang out with you and Karen. Honestly, that was my only expectation. I was pretty wide open to whatever direction that you wanted to take tonight. But at the same time, having been in Poasttown a couple times prior, I know the vibe and the feel of that location in general. So I felt like probably something would happen. I didn't know what might pop off. But really, I didn't have an intention of like being knocked down by the supernatural. I was just open to whatever. I was ready to roll with it. I really want to help facilitate your experiments. That's the other thing I wanted to do.
Well, I appreciate that. And I suspect, I can't wait to say this to you. I suspect you may be more intertwined into this investigation than you initially realize. And the reason I'm saying that is because, well, before I get to that, my expectations were that I was very hopeful to be finding some kind of confirmation about what I think is even going on with this investigation in the first place. Like, what are we like? Because I think when you first go to a location, at least for me, I try to just completely have like a supernatural buffet in front of me. And I have no idea, like, I don't know when's the last time you ate at a buffet. I know COVID kind of got rid of buffets for most people, but
it's been a minute.
Whenever I show up to a buffet, I have no idea what I'm going to eat until I'm in line. And whatever just pops out at me, whatever strikes me, I grab and I load my plate up with it. And then later I'm like, oh, I'm too full. And now I really want this, but I'm too full to get it. That's how I try to approach like an investigation at a location, especially if I've never been there before. I have no idea, I don't want to close myself off to maybe enjoying some garlic mashed potatoes if they happen to be there. But, obviously it led me down a certain path, researching and, doing an overview of a lot of the footage that has come in since October, the initial investigation. It obviously led me to a certain place, and that place was trying to communicate again with what I believed was the energy, the entity in the place from the stars. After doing like our own version of the CE5 kind of stuff, trying to initiate CE5 contact, I believe that we did that. So I went in this past week, hoping to try to get confirmation specifically from whoever may have been doing that the first time. And, I got to say that I was kind of, I was very hopeful, but I was kind of blown away by some of the results that we got. And there's this poem. What is it called? I don't even know the name of the poem, but Lauren, my girlfriend, last night, and we went over a poem, right, that she wanted me to read and look at, and then have a discussion about this poem. And it was all about like putting logs on a fire, how the space in between the logs is just as important to the fuel as the logs themselves. So you put too much fuel on a fire and it douses the fire. And then at the end of the poem, it talks about how the fire almost has its own agency. And the fire, if you give the space for the fire to grow, once you've started it, the fire knows where it wants to go and it will go there. And it really struck me about, the allusions to the space in between and how that fire grows. And it made me want to reconsider and go back through almost every footage I've ever, accumulated, because we're always looking for these hits on an investigation, right? Whether it's the voice coming through the box or whatever. And it makes me wonder, like, what have I missed in all of those spaces in between? Getting those like, oh, moments on an investigation. Are there even bigger oh moments happening in between, right?
Yeah.
So I'm very excited to go over our footage. I looked very briefly at the footage that I shot, just to make sure that those oh moments were there, and the memory card did not fail, so I've got them.
Good.
But it's been making me wonder, like trying to remember in my mind, like all those moments in between. And I think the moments in between also, I'm just thinking of this now, could relate to adding context later to the quote unquote hits that we get through devices or the experiences we have.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what makes the fire grow of a paranormal investigation. As opposed to just kind of going out and, it's more like a fishing expedition more than it is, hey, let's go to the bridge today and drop in a line, which also is fun to do every once in a while, just to see if you get anything. But when you undertake a fishing expedition, when you're out at sea for who knows how long, it's a little more, I guess, in depth than that.
Well, I suppose if you lay out your body of work over, years of paranormal research, if you start to see a common thread or a narrative, that really must feel like a big accomplishment to be able to pull all that together, And there's probably are things that we've missed, like we'll talk about some of the details, but it makes me want to kind of review a few things myself.
Yeah, and with the cabin sessions, you're using ITC in the cabin sessions. I highly recommend anyone listening to check these out. They're all linked on paraholics.com. And is the YouTube, what's the specific like URL? Like, do you have it named, or is it linked?
Yeah, it's Paraholics.
It's Paraholics. Okay, good.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to the cabin sessions from 2021, and it says right off the bat, seemingly, it says one God to you, which is interesting because it ties into something that happened with us at Poasttown last Sunday. And then this is why I'm saying I think you might be a little more intertwined than maybe initially either one of us maybe have even realized. Is you say, I believe you say, what's your name? And it responds, I don't know if you remember this, but it responds with a number.
Yeah.
It says
Yep.
7.
Hmm.
I'll have to go back and look, or I'd have to go back and listen specifically, but in an interview with Eric Connor of Epic Paranormal, there is almost like a relationship. Now, I don't think I'm mistaken on this, but there is an entity that comes through regularly that identifies as 7.
Correct.
And so now I'm curious, and this is going to lead to something totally other else when I think of like, where does the investigation go from here? Like figuratively and literally. I'm thinking that because I'm thinking Joshua Tree, I'm thinking Mount Shasta, I'm thinking, going back to Poasttown, obviously. I don't think physical location is as necessary anymore. That's just the sense I get, because the conversation has been started. I don't think that I need to be at Poasttown to continue this investigation now, like I've been thinking this whole time. So I'm curious on your, I guess, history with getting this kind of response as far as regarding like a god or God itself coming through devices. Can you tell me a little bit about like, if that's happened a lot or if it's happened only at certain places, etc.?
7 specifically really started with the cabin sessions. Um, I did I've never really had a device that would work here at my, sorry, that would really work here at my cabin. I just have really bad reception out here. And one of the ghost boxes, the one that I used on the first cabin session, was the first device that I had owned that seemingly got any type of signal or enough material uh, through the radio band to actually sweep and function and sound somewhat like a ghost box. So I did a session. It would have been like around December of 2020, and I actually called it my Saturnalia session. And I just did it on a whim. It was kind of like going to the bridge and just throwing in a line like you were talking about. And I was shocked that I actually got some replies. And one of the things that really popped through to me was 7. Especially in reference to like a name of a person or being. And throughout my whole 2021 cabin sessions, that whole 8 weeks, 7 came through pretty regularly, along with references to gods and also to lots of suggestions to pray, which I found really interesting, especially in moments where I'm trying to figure out how to better communication, and which makes me think now about the whole like consciousness aspect that you're really working on. So whatever it is about us as humans that think that we can use our consciousness to reach out to a being beyond ourselves, maybe it all ties together. So yeah, but back to your question, it was definitely during the cabin sessions that I really started getting hit with those types of details.
Yeah, it's wild to think about.
Hmm.
The, I mean, I guess I don't know if it's I've long suspected as much as I've just been very curious about the, because when it goes, I have to zoom out a little bit. Like when I zoom out and go to thinking about portals in general, it's my belief that it's highly possible that many of the creature sightings and other strange phenomena that people are experiencing across the world are, first and foremost, they're real and they're valid. Secondly, that even though I do believe there are a lot of these things out there, I do think that there's probably fewer than I originally suspected. And the reason I think that is because I believe that they're using these portals, interdimensional or, spiritual, otherwise portals, to travel around, and that they can be multiple places in the blink of an eye. And potentially they could even be in the same place at the same time. And this is something I'm just now thinking about. When, in quantum physics, when they do that experiment, the slit experiment, and the particle becomes a wave or it becomes not the wave, right? And it changes depending on if it's being observed. I don't know if this makes any sense or if there's any chance of it whatsoever. Is it possible that, let's just say, let's go as crazy as it can be, just for the sake of being as crazy as it can be. This phenomena is experiencing time and space differently than we are. These entities are. Could they be multiple places at the same time? And depending on how someone is observing them, or if someone is observing them at all, they appear differently. Could a ball of light, a sphere, appear to someone in, let's say, Norway, and at the same time, someone in, let's say, Southern Ohio or Northern California is observing that same phenomena with a different device potentially as a voice coming through a box or a Sasquatch or, something else happening like knocks. So it is, I wonder if it's all the same phenomena taking different forms depending on if it's being observed and who and how is observing it.
And our intentions on that were, it can maybe conforms to whatever it is our expectation wants to be fulfilled at that time.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I think that's probably a huge part of it.
Mm-hmm.
The intention. Yeah. And I guess that goes into, going somewhere specifically looking for something like I was doing this past Sunday, looking for confirmation specifically. Mm-hmm. And golly gee willikers, do I feel like we got confirmation on Sunday. It also makes me curious if, these portals aren't, this is something that I have absolutely I haven't even done any research on whatsoever, but I'm inclined to believe that portals are sentient now for some reason, as opposed to just these like physical doorways that, appear in our physical space where things can travel, here and from. For whatever reason, I'm just inclined to believe that portals are sentient and they're not just these tools to be used by other creatures and other beings. And that just kind of makes me like wonder, like, well, that means I don't know anything, right? Like, if the portal itself is sentient, as if, you hear often about, whether it's in, ancient religion or mythology, you hear about those who, the ferryman, those who ferry from the land of the living to the dead across a river. You have to get on the boat, and there's always someone there to take you, right? It's not Hermes. I'm trying to think of, anyway, I haven't had enough coffee yet, but what if portals potentially are some of these, mythic ferrymen who can transport the living to the dead,
gap,
the bridge the gap, right? And what if going from the living to the dead doesn't mean you're dying necessarily, and it just means, okay, well, I'm going to take you from the living, the quote unquote living, to go communicate or interact with the dead, because it's such a small difference between the two, even though here on Earth to human beings, it's everything, right?
Right. And if we're initiating the contact through our intentions, somehow we would be reaching out to these ferrymen to open the door for us. So they would have to be cognizant or able to tap into our request, our will, our ritual.
Yeah. And if we are all connected by the fabric of consciousness, intertwined in this same net, it doesn't seem like it's that difficult to get the message. I mean, they
Right.
might even have the message before we even know they do.
Hmm.
Huh.
Yeah.
I mean, there obviously there's a lot to unpack and it's a lot to think about. And, I'm gonna have to go down some rabbit holes and see who's been writing and researching and discussing the possible sentience of interdimensional portals, because, as much as I'd love, as much as the ego part of my brain would like, oh, yeah, maybe you're the first one who thought about portals being sentient, man. Yeah, that's not that's not going to be the case. Um, but so hopefully someone's done all the heavy lifting, and I can just kind of, you know, tap into that. But when we were doing our first, or let's go back to the in the doll room. Well, you and I went to the doll room, and we were using uh, the reverse audio box,
Hmm.
and all my cameras died when we got up there. Like it was a little while, but or one, I had a memory card get full. That's on me, and then the battery died, and then another battery died. But which is fine. I don't have like the nicest equipment in the world, so and it's almost to be expected at Poasttown. But we had some interesting responses, and I've gone back and I've only really looked at it once, rather quickly, just to make sure I had it on camera. But this God thing came up again, didn't it?
Yes. Yeah, I did. Yeah, it came up in that deep voice, deep throat. That's what we'll call it.
Yeah, that's a good name. Yeah,
Yeah.
deep throat. And because I remember specifically, you or I, one of us, requested that the rest of the voices coming through, the rest of the audio coming through, take a step back, I believe,
Yeah.
and to let deep throat come through more.
Hmm.
And whether it's a self-fulfilling prophecy or just a perception or not, it seemed like that happened for a little bit when we made that request.
I agree. Yeah.
And I can't remember if that was before or after we started getting, or we got those in pretty quick succession, kind of a boom, boom, boom. But because I think we heard, when I was going back in the footage, I think we heard, obviously we were talking about, can you introduce yourself? Can we know who's here? We were having that kind of general conversation at first, I believe. And then it sounded like God came
Hmm.
through.
Yeah.
And then we asked, well, who are you? What is your name? And then Ra came through. Now, the skeptic will say, oh, you heard the sound Ra through a reverse audio box, randomly come out, and, touche to the skeptic here, because, Ra is not exactly an obscure sound that can be made. But
Right.
in conjunction with the timing of hearing God, at the very least, it's extremely interesting.
Well, not only that, whenever you're doing, any type of ITC experiment and you're dealing with sweeping radios, anytime you can get responses that, over a period of time that are all in the same voice, that's something that's really hard to discredit. And I don't know if you remember this or not, but I believe it was you asked you know, when that deep throat was coming through, and you ask where he was, or where is he, or where does he exist, and I believe we got Cosmos. I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember that or not.
Yeah.
So I mean, we were hitting like boom, 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 these real relevant responses that were intelligent and in the same voice. And by the way, the device we were using was reverse speech. So it gets harder and harder to completely discredit uh, that experience in my mind.
Yeah. You know, that's not something I was even considering, that, you know, it was the same voice that gave us all three.
Hmm.
And, you know, the rule of three, I love that because of comedy, but, you know, human beings in general love things in threes. And it really, it really resonated when we got God. Well, what's your name? Ra. Well, where are you from? Cosmos, which is interesting because, you know, when people think about the heavens, etc., you know, obviously it's the stars. And,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, obviously the Christian heaven is different than going to like the star system, the Pleiades star system or something like that. Um, but maybe it's not. And so I wish we knew, like, oh, and then it downloaded an entire, you know, not manifesto, but like a manual for living. You know, like it channeled into, then we just started writing messages for humanity. Like this isn't the law of one, but at least not at this point.
Right.
But it is interesting that Ra comes through after saying it was God, and then says it's in the cosmos, when we were specifically looking for confirmation about contact with intelligence, aliens, etc., from space, from that stem back all the way to October. And when you look at the connectivity of being able to use our intention and our consciousness to, I don't know, ping these things to actually respond to us, to me, it becomes very compelling. And I do remember at one point, I can't remember if we were in the main room, or I'm calling it the main room, where we initially did the gateway device, and then we were doing that when we got the big confirmation that we'll talk about here in a second. It seems like, you know, using the consciousness in the space, um, not really allowing ourselves to have too many rules, you know, outside of the ones that are necessary to make sure you can actually even understand what the hell you're even doing. Like everybody shouldn't just be talking nonstop the whole time, talking about, oh, what'd you have for lunch? It's like, well, no, we're trying to, you know, let's have some, let's have some guidance. But it seems to reinforce this idea, at least to me, about the, you know, the connectivity of phenomena. Even though a Sasquatch didn't walk into the room and be like, hey, you talking to my buddy Ra? Which would be cool if Sasquatch just popped in like, hey, you talking to Ra? Tell him I need some lettuce uh, from the store later. Um, but do you think that there is, I don't know the best way to ask this question, but when it comes to your experience, you know, trying to communicate with the unknown, the supernatural, the paranormal, are you finding that there are ways in which you specifically, I don't know, are feeling more comfortable communicating and getting and having a conversation that you understand?
That's actually that's actually a really great question. I know when I first started going into haunted locations and doing these experiments, I would get really excited if I would get an EVP that would be like, you know, a relevant, you know, one word like go or no or yes. To me, that was a really big deal. And it still is. And even when I started using more of the radio sweeping ITC devices, just getting like a seemingly intelligent one word reply at that point just knocked my socks off. And then fast forward a few years later, I think, technology has gotten better, but at the same time, I think my connection has really grown as well. And also probably my intentions are more open than what they were initially because, once upon a time, it was all about tragic history and a ghost, and now it's grown bigger than that, and I seem to be more open, and the more open I am, the more the communication has gotten intense, and instead of getting the one word, one syllable words, getting phrases and sentences. And so that has been a slow evolution for me personally. And there are times that's really kind of freaked me out, like I cannot believe that I've gotten the messages that I have, or the types of replies, or the details of the replies. So that's something that I'm growing to be more comfortable with. And but at first it was kind of startling, to be honest.
Yeah, I can understand that. The the evolution of each individual investigator, I think, is a fascinating journey. And because I kind of feel like I came into investigation in general just as like so wide open to everything that I feel like I've been slowly but surely not becoming more narrow, but becoming more specific, I think. And I think each investigation might dictate the way that goes
Hmm.
for us. And I I don't know. I wonder what you think about making the choice with clear intention to do these longer term investigations. The cabin sessions is a perfect example of that. How different do you think an investigation becomes when one decides from the very outset that this is not a one off?
Yeah, the cabin sessions, which I may have mentioned the last time I was on. I talked about how it was my first real step into more of a controlled session. I still wanted to like set these parameters, and over the course of the 8 weeks, the the themes and the responses that were coming through consistently, that really got my attention. And so, like this year, doing the cabin sessions, I've decided I'm going to stretch it out over the entire year, just to get a bigger swath, so to speak, of what might come through when I'm asking the same general set questions, and just to see how it might grow into a different type of dialogue that I can build on from there. So I don't think anything is over. I think this is definitely something that is worth pushing the envelope on. As this grows, and I do feel like it's a growth thing.
Yeah, and I think if the listeners go to paraholics.com, you can go and see the cabin sessions, and you've really clearly and beautifully laid out the parameters that you're talking about. So if you want to like a real thoughtful, detailed description of what someone is intending to do with a specific investigation, I can't recommend that enough to get over there and check that out, because you'll see, and then you get to watch and listen to the actual results of such a thing, which is pretty interesting. And so you've got Deep Throat coming through the cabin sessions currently, it sounds like, as well.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that's why when that voice came through when we were in the doll room, it was instant recognition for me, because I've been talking to I've been talking to this guy for a while now.
Well, I appreciate you introducing me to him.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that's any accident when it comes to investigators and their devices, home teams and their, locations. I think these are some of the most underutilized ways to, really get into an investigation in a deep way, quicker than just showing up cold somewhere.
Yeah.
And and the shows do this on to some degree with interacting with or getting some background on locations. But I'd love to see a more in-depth approach where you kind of you're they're being better utilized, and especially when it comes to the devices and specifically the locations. But um there I make no bones about it. I think that there's a clear bump up in effectiveness, the fact that you were there with your devices. The same way I think we got some pretty incredible stuff with Eric and his devices when he was with us in October. I think and then having Ernie and Brian from POV Paranormal during the daytime, we got a really fascinating physical piece of evidence that was with one of their pieces of equipment. And I don't think I would have gotten that with my physical tool or that or device that I may have been using. I could be wrong, but I think that the likelihood of getting a hit and success and communication are highly improved by using people who have clear relationships and connections to things. But
I think I told you that the first time that that deep throat came through was the actual day that I got my human skeleton out of the Knights of Pythias temple when I was with our friend Jeff Bodart. That was the first time I remember hearing his voice. And then last year through the cabin sessions, he made pretty frequent appearances, from week to week. And I have one cabin session up for 2022. Definitely hear him there, and I've recorded February's as well that I'm still in the editing process. And I have to say, usually when he comes through, the messages are pretty intense and also seemingly almost disconnected from the mesh of audio. I mean, it definitely stands out. And like the one cabin session that I do have posted for 2022, I remember asking about the future of mankind, and that's when he steps up and as plain as day, so clear, he says, "Mankind is exhausted." And I thought, well, that is so true. You think about the past, couple of years we've lived through, and everything, the anxiety and exhaustion, for the whole world. I mean, definitely can be felt. And I just felt like, he always brings like a big picture comment to the table, which I don't know. I think it's definitely connected.
yeah, when you look at the pandemic, hopefully on its last breath, and then the major invasion of Ukraine by Russia that the whole entire world is watching, right on the heels of such a thing. I mean, talk about trying to
Hmm.
kick someone when they're down, is what it
Yeah.
seems like to me, which itself is exhausting. Like I think that's a great term for like, you know, what's happening right now. And we did get a word that, and I can't remember if it was in the main room or the doll room. We got, and I can't remember which device it was from. I think it was from the one that was encased in the wood from an old asylum, the one that you
Hmm.
used for the first time.
Yeah.
We got the word reveal. I think we
Yeah.
were, if I'm not mistaken, we were trying to figure out, look, okay, so what is there something you want to tell us? And at some point, the word reveal came through, and which is intriguing, obviously. Like, okay, well, tell us what do you
Hmm.
want to, what do you want us to reveal? or what do you want to reveal to us? I mean, and then, trying to figure out like, well, are we supposed to be revealing something, or, who's revealing, what is being revealed? And so I think that comes, next potentially, trying to figure out, well, what, or like, okay, now we might have an idea of who we're talking to, but well, what's the conversation, and more specifically, this idea that this voice is coming through in multiple locations is something that really fascinates me.
I don't know if you remember, I said something to you that night that in the cabin session that I posted for January, Deep Throat told me in 2 months uh, that 2 months we will know the secret. And and this, I believe, the line of questioning was about aliens when I was asking. I think that's what specifically where I was when that came through. So 2 months. So we're in that second month now.
Isn't that interesting that
It's
two
so
months
weird.
later you're in Poasttown? We're
Yeah,
sitting in what I'm calling the main room, Bonk City, where things go
Bonk City.
bonkers. And we've got multiple devices set up. We've got a string of REM pod lights. We've got, what is it, the EDI meter? I always forget the name of that
Yes.
one.
Yeah. Yeah.
EDI
EDI.
meter.
Hmm.
And then there was a REM pod behind us. We had some cameras, but specifically the EDI meter is what went Bonk City and Bonk City. And
Yeah.
I was playing CE5 protocol chimes or initiatory sounds. And I believe it was your idea to keep them playing
Hmm.
and during the session. And then, I'm playing them into one of the walkie talkies we had. We set up another walkie talkie into the hallway. So it's echoing in a, talk about dramatic effect. It was pretty cool. I mean, when you want to set an atmosphere for getting, some interesting experiences, we definitely had the stage set for like, wow, something's going to happen here, right?
Dude, if ET's hand would have came around the wall and offered us some Reese pieces, I would not have been surprised at that moment, man. I mean, you could just feel it in the air, like we're charging this place.
Yeah, and this is probably more than any time during that investigation. This is when I had the most specific line of questioning that I was like really focused on. And I said, at some point, I said, "Are you from the star Procyon?" Which I believe was my number one suspect from October. Someone from that area of Procyon. And nothing comes through. And so shortly after that, I, transitioned to like, well, my number one suspect initially that I was most excited about was a different star system or a different star. But my research led me to believe that it was not uh, the actual quote unquote culprit. So then I just kind of threw out there. I was like, well, let's go to the next one down the list. Like, are you from Sirius, the Dog Star? And as soon as I finished saying Dog Star, almost like in the middle of it, the EDI meter goes into Bonk City.
Yeah.
And I think by where you were sitting, I had a direct view at the EDI meter. I was sitting directly, looking directly across to it. Um, do you remember like what was going on in that moment?
Well, we were both sitting for one. I was halfway keeping an eye on the REM pod like strand that we had trailing down the hallway. Was trying to keep an eye on that, and you were asking your questions, and everything was, besides the sweep of the box and the tones that you were playing. beyond your questions, there really wasn't anything else, that we could perceive that was going on. But yeah, I mean, as soon as you jump from Procyon to Dogstar, I mean, everything lit up like so big and so bright, because it wasn't just like a flash. It was like it kind of fluttered for a second and then just went on, like it's turned on its high beams. And it just didn't like flash the high beams. It like stayed on, like, here I am. And I just remember at that moment, it was stayed on long enough that I had enough time to look at what it was doing and then look at you, and we both made eye contact, like, oh shit. And had enough time to look back at the meter before everything just went and shut down again. It was it was great. It
Yeah,
really
it
was.
it was one of those oh moments. And
Yeah.
so we obviously we stuck to that line of questioning for at least a few minutes, and I feel like the device still was kind of lighting up when we continue the line of question. We straight off that path of line of questioning, device kind of goes quiet. We come back to it, it lights up again, and then it's just one of those things where it's okay, here's manufactured connection confirmation that I'm making, that we're making here. And for better or for worse, depending on someone's point of view about the paranormal being real or unreal. And going back to that poem by Judy Brown that I was talking about earlier, the space between the logs, and that poem really kind of it really struck me. And I'm wondering your thoughts on, is the space between logs here of a paranormal investigation of fueling the fire, is it these manufactured connections by going back and the space in between the actual physical investigation part of it, or being at a location using devices, is that space between the connecting of things, right? And whether you want to call it research or just sitting around thinking about it, wondering, other things happening that kind of like, oh, this could be possible. It feels to me like that could be almost as important when it comes to an investigation than the actual investigation itself.
Yeah, I feel that if you're someone that you're just solely focused on, let's say, one avenue in the paranormal, like you're just solidly a ghost guy, and that's your lane, and where you're that's where you're going to stick to it. Uh, and that's where I was for a long time. I think you go down that road so far, and you either are completely just entertained by the bells and whistles and the few things that you catch along the way, which is fine. It's great. But if you're someone who really ponders and wants like more in-depth knowledge, or if you have more questions, I think eventually you kind of feel like you've hit a dead end, or you get hit by a rut, because I don't think you're going to get the satisfactory knowledge that maybe you're seeking about the existence of ghosts per se. But I think if you step back and start to absorb and look at the paranormal as a whole, and all the different avenues and how that might feed into a haunted experience, or a Sasquatch experience, or what have you, I think it just kind of, all the different diverse branches that will stem off that just give you so much more room to kind of play and to feel things out, and to try to put together like your manufactured, like, your narrative or your structure of what the big picture of all this might ultimately be.
Yeah. And make no mistake, I think these, at heart, I'm a storyteller. And
Mm,
I don't think any storyteller wants to tell a boring story. So
right.
the idea of a story is, first and foremost to entertain someone who wants to hear a story. And after that comes okay, what message is being transmitted through the story? What lessons or what information is being revealed through the story? And then you can go into deeper and deeper layers of, well, what is the meaning of the story, like for life itself, et cetera, which is kind of, the lens that I'm framing all of this stuff through.
The metaphor.
The metaphor, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm not trying to tell a story that, from the outset that is like, well, this story is going to teach people how to live, because for some reason, I have access to the ways that humans should be living their lives. It's like, that's a dangerous road to go down, for anybody. And, you can see the results of people being consumed by such an idea that they know once and for all the way that things need to be done. And, whether you want to describe that as, Putin or someone else, right? Like, no, this
Right.
is the way I need to do this, and I'm right, and everybody else is wrong. That's a little bigger than just like telling a story about a haunted location and communication that comes within. But the idea that, communication gets established, the communicator gets identified, the obvious next question becomes, what do we talk about? And that's where I think it gets a little more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to figure out the discussion itself. And I think time will show potentially what that discussion needs to be. But more specifically, I think what happened on Sunday, in hindsight, and it happened. I talked to Karen. She was still driving, like around 11. I think I left the school around 11:30 Eastern time. I was there for about an hour. I hung out with Daryl for a little bit, and then left. Had a call with Karen, and during that conversation, it just kind of like jammed itself into my brain that this investigation needs to go to other places. And I don't exactly know where. I mean, my first thoughts are Mount Shasta. My second thought is Joshua Tree to the desert. I don't know where else. I mean, literally, I think this conversation can go anywhere now. I feel like they've given us, a burner phone. Hey, just hit call, right?
Right.
Whenever you need us. And I'll be interested to see what other things pop up, other places that are clearly saying, come over here real quick. We got something for you over here. And, so, part of me, in a selfish kind of way is like, oh, I wonder if these cabin sessions for you are going to go in a direction, from time to time, every once in a while, piggybacking on what you were doing at Poasttown on Sunday as well.
I hope so. Like I said, I'm happy to be contributing in any way, and if the synchronization of what I'm doing and you're doing, if it aligns, man, I mean, that's all the cooler to me.
Yeah, I mean, and I already feel like what you've been doing on your own, I feel like that's already been done. I mean, like, as far as like the synchronization goes, potentially, I feel like that's
Mm-hmm.
already been happening long before we ever even decided to go to Poasttown.
Yeah, before we met.
Yeah. So that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I have an idea for when you're in Indiana. I think I have a location, an outside location that you would be geeked out about for us to try to establish communication. And I can tell you about it now, or I can send you links afterwards, and you can look at it. But I think you'd be, if there ever was a UFO, ghost, and Sasquatch hotspot in the state of Indiana, I know where it's at.
Well, no, and
Yes,
you
I
got
said
my
I said
attention.
Sasquatch.
You
I
got
said Sasquatch.
you got my attention because I'll be let me bring up my calendar so I don't get it incorrect. I'll be performing in Indianapolis. I forget what the name of the brewery is on April 10th. So for
Okay.
people in that area, that's a Sunday night. I'll be doing a Sunday night show in Indianapolis, and I'm trying to see if I can get some other shows put up around it. But so that's going to be the time frame. So that's a month from now. That's great. Yeah, I'd love to go to this area, obviously, because that was going to be my next thing that I talked about when it comes to this investigation. I believe goes to different areas. And I'm really excited when I think about it because the idea of the thing is that it's an ongoing series that I post, on my YouTube or whatever. And I get really excited thinking about different places, different investigators. Some of them I haven't even met yet, probably, that could potentially, put their stamp on it and, put their voice out there through my channel, that I'm trying to broadcast. That kind of brings all of this stuff together. I mean, because I guess you hear a lot about the paranormal world can be a little bit catty, and people
Never
can be,
noticed.
yeah, people can be possessive of locations, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, it's like, guess what? There's been billions of people on this earth who have died. I mean, I think there's plenty of ghosts for everybody to talk to. And my suspicion is that there's plenty of aliens out there for people to talk to, and Sasquatch as well. So let's
That's right.
let's all forget about all that other BS stuff and just focus on, like, well, are we getting to the bottom of anything, or how can we
Mhm.
all pool our resources together, so that we can show the entire world that that all this great stuff is happening. Where is this spot in Indiana?
It is in the middle of the Morgan Monroe Forestry.
Oh
There is
God.
it's a cemetery that an
Oh
old
God,
pioneer,
God.
yeah, yeah, an old pioneer cemetery in the middle of the forestry that you don't really, it's not like a difficult hike, but it's probably a quarter of a mile or so down a wooded lane. And this cemetery, if you look up, like, Indiana's top 10 most haunted locations, Step Cemetery with two P's is the name of it. And it was the site of a religious cult used to meet out there, and they would perform sacrifices and sex rituals and snake biting and you name it. They were that's one of their meeting places. And then they were called the Crabites. The guy that they followed, I believe his name was William Crabb. And I have all this documented. It's a really interesting story. But there are also a few graves with some ghost lore associated with it, and so people go out there routinely, wanting to contact ghosts. But it's also there's been several Sasquatch and UFO sightings in the Morgan Monroe Forestry too, and it all seems to be surrounding this Step Cemetery area. So I thought, man, if lightning's going to strike, it's going to strike at Step Cemetery for Ryan.
I mean, this sounds like a home run. And I think
Yeah,
you have either advertently or inadvertently done me a huge solid. I'm trying to actively find the connection between the occult and Bigfoot.
hmm,
And because I do believe that the certain occult knowledge and rituals, as laid out by Alan Greenfield and laid out by Dean Radin, show the connection between ghosts and UFOs and paranormal abilities, etc., through occult ritual knowledge. And the fact that Sasquatch has been shown or has been reported at this place that was obviously occult in nature, when you have a cult there doing rituals and things like that, it leads me to believe that that it furthers my mind down the path that Sasquatch also is using these portals, or has a relationship with these portals, I should say. If I do
maybe
believe
he's
that
the
there's something,
ferryman. Maybe he's the ferryman.
Oh wow. Okay, we got. I mean, who's making the T-shirt? A Sasquatch on the boat
On the
crossing the
boat.
river.
The river Styx.
I mean, that's a great T-shirt. That's a great T-shirt
Love it.
idea.
Yeah.
No, that sounds okay. Now let me ask you this next question. This is an important question for me to know the answer to. And I know the answer before I ask it, but are you anticipating being at Step Cemetery during the day, the night, or both?
We could do both easily. It's one of the few cemeteries. State law, you have to be out of the cemeteries in the state of Indiana by sundown. But with this being in like a park, you're allowed to be out there until 11 p.m. before DNR would run you off if they'd ever show up. So we could do either or both,
Okay, I
or
know.
one or the other. I mean,
I figured you'd say that, and I think it'd be good for me to be outside in the forest at nighttime, actively trying to initiate contact, even though, even though that's the feeling I'll get. But maybe Ra will protect me from whatever screech noise might be potentially directed my way this time. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have to do this, and
yeah.
maybe we'll see if. I wonder how far away from Indianapolis do you think it is?
From Indianapolis, you're probably looking at 40 minutes or so. I
Oh,
don't think
so
it wouldn't be too bad.
so kind of close.
Yeah, it's not that
Okay.
far away.
Yeah, we'll have to see if Jeff is around.
Definitely.
We'll have to see if the wand man can if Bodar can join us.
I don't know if he does the out of doors. We'll have to ask.
You know what? I don't blame him if he doesn't, and
Yeah.
I don't blame him if he doesn't. I ain't mad at you, Jeff, if you don't want to go out into the woods with us at night trying to contact creatures and aliens and ghosts. I don't know if I want to. I mean, I definitely do, but God damn it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this has been agreed to. So
Mhm.
if there's anything I hate worse than being, scared to death, it's, going back on a promise. So, we'll have to do it.
Yeah,
An
definitely.
agreement. I hate to break agreements. So, well, this has been fun. I think hopefully the listeners are going to check out the cabin sessions. I mean, the ITC stuff that you're doing is incredible. And all the gadgets and toys you have are, it's just I feel like I need to open a new credit card and just start. I want to have paranormal Christmas over here and just open a bunch of devices. But I'll be interested to know what happens or what I stumble on in the meantime before. I'm going to look into the Crabites and look into this place before we go as well. And
Okay.
I'll be interested to know if like you stumble upon anything as well, as far as where your conversation that you've started with the great unknown during doing these cabin sessions, where it leads you as well. So we'll have to check in on that as well in the future for listeners, so they can keep up to date on the investigation you've got going, you know, over on your side as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And it'll be fun because I'm certain it'll happen. It'll be fun when certain parallels probably pop up along the way between your investigation and my investigation, and in other people's investigations as well. I think that's like a really cool idea to think about. All these different investigations that are happening around the world right now, how many of them are so closely related that the investigators don't even realize? And
Hmm.
whether investigators are shut off to other people being like, well, no, this isn't your investigation. This is my investigation. This is our investigation. You shouldn't be encroaching on these things. Or for a more likely reason, just don't know. Because I don't know how often a lot of people when in the investigation world are publicly broadcasting their investigations as they go, as opposed to
Hmm.
like, here's a finished product for you to watch. I mean, you're clearly doing that with the cabin sessions.
Hmm.
I'm trying to do that with the Poasttown investigation, with at least talking about it and having conversations about it without putting up video and stuff. um so it's not like it's not like totally cloaked in secrecy. But I think when we talk about these things and these investigations, I think they can become richer as they go, as opposed to trying to keep them to ourselves for whatever reason. And especially ideas, people are I know in the entertainment industry, people are keep ideas very closely guarded because they don't want them stolen and then someone else making them and
Yeah.
getting rich off of them, whatever. um,
Hmm.
I'm very familiar with that whole mindset when it comes to creating something. But I think it serves us all, really well when we do what you're doing, and kind of follow that lead of like laying out, these are the parameters, this is what I'm doing, you can recreate. And it almost strikes me as you know experiments in the world of parapsychology,
I would love it.
repeatable things.
Hmm.
Like, this is what you can do to try to repeat and see if you get these same results. And
Yeah.
I don't know if we're necessarily, I'm sure there's people out there doing that. They're not on my radar yet. And so
Hmm.
if anybody listening to this knows about this, please send me information, because, I'd love to talk to those people. But trying to recreate this, Western view of science idea of repeatable experiments, and doing that in the paranormal world with our own set of guidelines.
Hmm.
And and I think the occult is probably the bedrock of that. And whether it's hermeticism and other things, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's really cool that you're putting that out there for people to
I would
to
love it. Sorry, I would love it if more people followed the same template and there were, hundreds of people doing the same sessions, same questions, and then we could, have like show and tell afterwards and just lay it all out and see if there were any similarities. That would be amazing to me.
That's a really fun idea.
Hmm.
I'm going to get one of those boxes. Mention
Okay.
again where you got that box. I want to shout them out.
Holte Paranormal.
Holte Paranormal, and I'm
Hmm.
guessing they've got a website, holteparanormal.com, or something close to
Yep.
that.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
I'm going to try to get my hands on one of those boxes, and then maybe you and I can come up with. I don't. I I can't say this with 100% certainty, but it's not going to happen. Me doing this in my house, in my apartment, with my girlfriend's going to be like, oh, okay, so now we're, she's not like a paranormal person necessarily, like she's not in
Yeah.
in that world, but at the same time, I don't think she wants me trying to, for lack of a better phrase, get abducted here at the apartment, things like that. And I got this place kind of locked down anyway, so I try not to have that stuff. But I do need to get myself a box and find a location I can go to regularly to do this, my own quote unquote cabin.
Yeah.
So that'll be fun, and we can come up with a set of questions as well. I mean, you've already got them, so I should just get a box and see with the questions you've asked what kind of results I'm getting.
Hmm.
And if anybody
Yeah.
else listening to this who is into this kind of thing or dabbles, I think they can reach out to you. So go to Holte
Yeah.
Paranormal,
Definitely.
and that's at HULTAY, if I'm not
AY.
mistaken.
Yep. Correct.
Um, so yeah, I gotta I got to get on that. And so, and you can reach out to Matthew by going to paraholics.com. There's a contact form there, or a way to contact you there, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And if anyone has trouble getting a box, I can try to help too. I mean, I know Steve personally, so I'll help, as an in between if I have to.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully I can get my hands on one.
Yeah.
But yeah, because it's a cool box. It is a really cool box.
Yeah. Thank you.
And it rings of a boombox a little bit to me too, which, growing up in the 80s and the 90s, I love me a good boombox, dude.
Oh, absolutely.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, let's remind people where they can find you, like on social media and stuff too.
It's paraholics.com, and all the social media stuff is linked on there. So feel free to give me a follow and send me a message, and I definitely follow back. So
hell yeah.
I love to check out our friends and family out there.
Yeah. And, go check out these cabin sessions. I mean, once you hear Deep Throat, I think once people hear Deep Throat, they'll get it. They'll be like, oh,
Yeah.
This is what told them it was God, Ra,
Yeah.
in the cosmos. Yeah, it'll get your attention.
I told you when that voice first came through, and I was with Jeff that day, and we were doing a reverse speech box session, and this voice came through. It was so startling to me because it was different than any voice or tone that I'd ever heard in any of my ITC experiments. And I joked to Jeff, it was like someone doing like a bad Antonio Banderas accent, or like the most interesting man in the world, for the commercial. And so, yeah, it definitely stands out.
Yeah. And what we didn't even talk about? We'll do that next time. We even talk about like the intentions when Frank started making his boxes.
Oh, yeah.
The Frank's box.
Yeah.
And that's a teaser for next time, because it wasn't to communicate with ghosts. It, in fact, was something altogether different, out in the stars. So that to me is really cool. That's a really cool, and you got great knowledge on the history of that and all that good stuff. So Matthew, thanks again for doing this. Had a ton of fun on Sunday.
Yeah, same.
Look forward to being in the field with you again and chatting again and just hanging out again soon. Thanks for the pizza, you bastard. You wouldn't let me pay for it.
You're welcome.
So I appreciate that. So check out paraholics.com. You can check out ryansingercomedy.com. I got tour dates. I'll have, links to tickets for the Indianapolis show, April 10th there. I've got other dates. I've got Durham, North Carolina coming up in May. I've got Cincinnati, more and more and more and more. So, and then, maybe more information about going back to Florida at some point as well. All that stuff coming on the pod soon. So thanks for listening. We hope to see you soon. If we don't, we'll see you at the watering hole on the astral plane.